Policy in Action at Home is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on housing topics. Every month, we select a topic or current event and bring it up, bring in an expert for a brief presentation, and then open it up for discussion, questions, quote new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tanyan Nation, and Ama Mutsun, the lands on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are part of our community. So now I'll hand it over to our moderator, Corey Walbuck, Civic Leadership Manager, to talk about our discussion.
Thanks so much, Josh. If we can move to the next slide. Really quickly, I just want to share our code of conduct. Please be kind and courteous to each other. Please try to avoid any rude comments or any personal attacks. We do encourage asking questions in the chat and listening and learning together as we engage. Please do remember to keep today's conversation, questions, and everything in the chat focused on the discussion topic. And with that, if we could move on to the next slide. For our main speaker today, we will have Leslie Rodriguez, a partner at California Strategies. But first, I want to introduce a special guest, Assemblymember Patrick Ahrens, who represents District 24. District 24, was it District 24 or District 26? Patrick, you'll have to correct me on that. I'm so sorry about that. But his district includes the heart of Silicon Valley, including cities of Cupertino, Santa Clara, and Sunnyvale, and parts of San Jose, including El Viso and West San Jose, and unincorporated communities like Burbank and Fruitdale. He has championed policies to expand access and affordability to higher education and focused on supporting community college students, ensuring pathways to economic mobility. And he's also been a huge housing champion. So with that, I'd like to introduce Patrick.
Thank you so much, Corey. It's always a pleasure to be speaking to all of our friends back at home. It is the last couple of weeks of session, and as many of you all know, in the advocacy space, it's the craziest time, but also the most important. I'm really glad to see my friend Leslie Rodriguez on the line, who's been a great thought partner with me as I enter into my first year of the legislature. And there's no shortage of things that we're moving on. I've held a town hall or community coffee every month that I've been in office, and I will tell you that Scott Wiener has better name ID in my district than I do when it comes to the bills that he's pushing. But one of the things that I appreciate about the senator is that he's not afraid to tackle really complex and tough issues and really getting to at the heart of, the things that we need to be focusing on, which is the number one priority that I'm hearing at all of the community coffees and all of the door knocking that I did last year, which is reducing the high cost of living and addressing affordable housing. And, that's exactly what the senator is doing. I'm really proud to be working with him hand in hand on many of the bills being brought forward. As much as we have shaken the sort of housing norms of the way in which we do things in Sacramento and locally, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that therein lies the difficulty of policy making when it comes to housing, is implementation on policy is just as important as the policy itself. And there's been some stumbling blocks along the way. I've been a legislative staffer for over 10 years before getting elected. And so I've seen my fair share of wanting to do things and seeing the implementation of it go awry. But it's just really great to be online with so many of you who share the vision of the sense of urgency that we need to be building on housing and affordable housing and how difficult it is in removing those barriers. We're tackling CEQA. If you were to tell me that the legislature was going to be pushing forward on CEQA reform, that's the third rail of politics in California. No one has been able to effectively address CEQA and in a way that helps build more housing that does not use CEQA to be hijacked the way it has to prevent housing from being built. And it's being done, and it's ruffling feathers. It's dividing Democrats, and it's dividing even some housing advocates along the way. But I think that what I can appreciate most of all in these discussions that I'm having, whether they be in coffee shops in Cupertino or in the halls of the legislature, it's that we can't be accepting the status quo any longer, and we need to try other things. Whether or not people are 100% on board with the direction that we're going in, we just can't stay stagnant any longer. And so that's been my commitment to stakeholders such as yourselves. That's my commitment to my constituents is we're going to try new things. We're going to move quick. We're not going to get everything 100% along the way, but we're not going to stand still, and we're not going to improve things on the edges anymore. I'm tired of celebrating 10 new houses being built in Sunnyvale or Cupertino or Santa Clara. It's not making a difference. And so, I didn't get elected to do ribbon cuttings for, 4 affordable housing units. We need to be bold, and that's going to cause friction. But at the end of the day, if we want incrementalism on housing policy, then we need to elect somebody else. And that's been my sense of urgency. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to see creative ways in which we can address these issues, and be happy to take a few questions before my meeting. I'm with the Progressive Caucus shortly after this to discuss all of these housing bills and how can we pass them.
Assemblymember Ahrens, thank you so much for joining us. I want to apologize again for my typo in the slide. For everybody, Assemblymember Patrick Ahrens represents District 26 in the State Assembly, not District 24. He is the representative for District 26. Again, I'm so sorry about that. Well, before you leave, I know you have a very busy week and day in Sacramento, but if you'd like to share anything more, maybe about why housing is so important to you personally, or about some of the big things in addition to CEQA that you're excited about happening on the housing front in Sacramento right now.
Yeah, I would just say, electing who you elect matters. I have been, for those of you who've followed my race or know me, that I've struggled with housing, housing issues personally. Me and my twin brother grew up homeless for large portions of our childhood and early adulthood. And those experiences created that sense of urgency for me in policy, and why I ran largely for the legislature, because you don't have people who experience homelessness or housing insecurity that typically get to as far as I've gotten. And not only though has that left me with a unique perspective, which is good and great, right? But I think where it has really helped is that it doesn't faze me when people come up to me being in opposition to building housing. It doesn't faze me or bother me if I get a couple of nasty emails or protests or people being upset on this bill or that bill, because I know that I'm going to stay true to my values, and I'm going to stay true to the mission of my own lived experience. And there's nothing that anyone else can take. You can't take that away from someone once they've experienced the harsh reality of the inaction of sort of this neoliberal frame of thought that is taking control of our housing policies for far too long. And so we need to be bold. We need to act with a sense of urgency, but we also need to deliver. We can't just be about being against Donald Trump or being against something. We need to be for something and actually deliver it. We can't just be like, oh yes, we support affordable housing. That's a buzzword. We actually have to build it. And we actually have to pass policies that empower and help build it, because otherwise, what are we doing here? And so that's really my commitment is, and my experience is pushing forward on policy, and being bold when loud actors start to get in our way and that have historically stopped the production of housing because they're the loud voices in the room. And so that's why I'm so appreciative to this organization for finding and seeking and organizing advocates to give us the cover that the legislature needs and the support and the organizing work that we need and the data to deliver on these messages. It makes my job in Sacramento a lot easier. So I appreciate you all as well.
Thank you, Senator Ahrens. That's first for sharing your personal story and your commitment. I think that's all of that is important for us to hear. It's important for us to understand, the tangible reality, especially for those who work, nose to the grindstone on affordable housing. Sometimes we lose sight of the big picture and what we're really fighting for, which is to materially improve the lives of people living here in Silicon Valley who are struggling to find and keep safe and stable and affordable housing. So thank you so much for joining us. As a former legislative staffer myself, I want to be kind to your staff who've told me that they know you need to get to your next thing. So I won't keep you and pest you with more questions, but we do want to say thank you again so much for taking a few minutes to join us today.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you everyone for your advocacy. The work continues, and I'm really, really excited to be working with you all in this effort. And I have some exciting events where you're going to hear more about my legislative bill package this year and pro-housing bills that I'm going to be introducing next year. But Khalil on my team will drop a flyer to you all if you're interested in coming to my barbecue in Santa Clara. It's free for everyone to come and hear more about my legislative efforts in person.
Thank you again. And yes, Khalil, feel free to drop that in the chat as well if there's a link.
Thank you.
And next, I'd like to introduce our main guest speaker of the day. Leslie Barker Rodriguez, she's a partner at California Strategies and the board chair of the SV at Home Action Fund, which is our partner organization. And she's going to be here to talk about some of the housing policy changes happening in California. And following her presentation, we'll have a little time for Q&A. And so as you may have seen, one of my colleagues had dropped in the chat a reminder that if you have questions, please do drop them into the chat at any point today, and we will try to get to as many as we can before the end of the program. We can't promise to get to all of them, but we will do our best. So I'd like to share a little bit more about Leslie. So Leslie Barker Rodriguez, again, she's a partner at California Strategies, LLC, which is a full-service public affairs firm based in Sacramento and with offices throughout California. In her work as a lobbyist, she supports efforts to make housing affordable to all Californians, advocating for innovative solutions such as adoption of community land trusts and funding for preservation and production of affordable housing. Rodriguez served as Deputy Director of External Affairs for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, representing the governor with multiple constituencies in Silicon Valley. In her role with the governor's office, she worked with the Business, Transportation, and Housing Agency on the expansion of broadband internet access to address the digital divide in rural California. Her work in education and economic development actually began in the early 1990s when she held a post in El Salvador, specifically in San Salvador. And at that point, she assisted newly repatriated refugee communities to build out their infrastructure. Rodriguez serves on multiple nonprofits on their boards, including Working Partnerships USA, again, the SV at Home Action Fund, and Child Advocates of Silicon Valley. And she is a founding board member of the Grande Center for Education and Economic Opportunity in Chalatenango, El Salvador. Please correct me if I butchered that pronunciation. Rodriguez also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Dominican University of California and a Master of Social Work from San Jose State University. Leslie, we're so thrilled to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Corey, for that really kind introduction. It's so nice to see a lot of, I saw folks as they were coming in, a lot of familiar faces and names. It's really nice to be here with everyone today. It's been an exciting year this past week. We're bearing down on the last couple of weeks, as Assemblymember Ahrens said, of the legislative session, and the pace has been a little bit bonkers, but let's get into it. If we can go to the first slide. So this slide is just to level set. I found this graph from the Legislative Analyst's Office really illuminating. It's a snapshot on housing costs since 2020, so since the beginning of the pandemic. So if it feels like the cost of housing, which was already high, got even more outrageous since the pandemic, you are not hallucinating. This graph clearly shows that it has increased quite a bit since 2020. Another unfun fact, since 1960, when my own parents bought their first home in California, the value of a typical home in California was about 4 times the average household income. In 2025, it's 11 times, and only 15% of Californians can actually qualify for that. And that's for home ownership. Rents are a little bit more reasonable, but as you can see from this graph, wages still don't keep up. And so the cost of housing continues to be a crisis. And if you're new here, California and housing in California, super expensive, and it's obligatory. You're required to be housed because we're seeing homeless encampments get swept, and even efforts to criminalize people being homeless. So we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. A lot of the action in California, in Sacramento this year, has been around production and trying to get housing built cheaper and faster. Again, as Assemblymember Ahrens said, CEQA is kind of the big news this year. One of the most common villains identified in making housing expensive and scarce has been California's landmark environmental legislation, CEQA, or California Environmental Quality Act. So the biggest news in housing would be the so-called CEQA reform. I'm using finger quotes because even though we're saying reform, it's basically more accurate to say that additional exemptions were created that would take some uses out of the CEQA review. Mainly housing, infill housing, some infrastructure, and wildfire, as is noted on this slide. The main purpose was not to weaken CEQA, and the idea was to allow for a more streamlined permitting in areas where there was already a general plan in place that would allow for that particular use. Infill housing, and infill housing only on parcels less than 20 acres, less than 85 feet tall, and that already meet local zoning standards. So as exciting as this is, it wasn't a large scale gutting of CEQA like a lot of people panicked about. Another thing that I find that I thought was super exciting was the freezing of building standards of introducing new building standards until 2031 that was included in the trailer bill. Again, this is an effort to accelerate the permitting process because every time that local governments would have to update their the building standards and so forth, it would slow things down, and time makes everything more expensive. So generally, CEQA reform has been the lament of developers and those who love them. for decades, and typically the combined might of labor and environmental justice groups have been able to hold the CEQA line. But this year, things changed. As again, as Assemblymember Ahrens said, this was the year that big things on CEQA reform got done. So a lot of people are scratching their heads going, okay, what gives? Why this year? Some would say that Governor Newsom was abundance pilled. Abundance is that book that was authored by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson that came out last spring. And for a hot second, it was basically the Project 2025 for Democrats. Word is that the governor gave copies of this book to the Democratic leadership and took to heart the author's criticism that the root of housing not getting built in California was because of CEQA. Personally, I take umbrage with that. I think that perspective takes away from the hard work of housing leaders in the legislature, like Senator Scott Wiener, like Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, and and Senator Nancy Skinner and David Chu before that, people who've worked really, really hard to fight for exemptions in CEQA in return for deeper affordability and accelerated permitting. We've seen the passage of the Housing Accountability Act, SB 330, Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act, all of this kind of work that allowed for ministerial approvals in subdivisions of multifamily lots, just a lot of work to get housing built and built quickly. Also want to commend my colleagues in the third house who have worked along with the members of the legislature for several years, many years, to make CEQA work as intended, to maintain that environmental quality standards. So make it work as intended, but still allow for increased production of housing to meet the needs of Californians. If I'm being honest, it probably helped that we have a lame duck governor with national ambitions, but sure, we can give the credit to Ezra Klein as long as it gets done. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, don't panic. This is just for illustrative purposes. We're not going to go through all of these bills. The other big thing in Sacramento, besides the budget trailer bills that brought about the changes in CEQA, the other big thing in Sacramento was this permit streamlining package. Last year, Assemblymember Wicks, our housing queen, she created the Select Committee on Permitting Reform that held a series of hearings that reviewed bottlenecks and choke points on getting stuff built. Housing, there were a series of hearings. One was specifically on housing, but there were other nexus issues as well, such as energy, water, and transportation. The white paper that came out of that effort, and shout out to Bay Area Council for all of their work on that, really helpful, but that white paper led to a comprehensive bill package of more than 20 bills that were introduced into the legislature last spring. A couple of the bills were integrated into the budget trailer, which we already mentioned, but most of these bills are hanging tough. As you can see, they're still being followed and closely watched. The ones in pink are 2-year bills that the authors are committed to continue working on. So, over the break and then into next year, we'll continue working on those. The ones that are not highlighted are on the floor of their second house, waiting for the final vote before they go to the governor's office. So what about the yellow ones? Well, the yellow ones are the bills that are on the dreaded suspense file. So what is the suspense file? You can go to the next slide. The appropriation suspense file in California is famously mysterious. It's a place where bills that have any kind of fiscal impact are held until the last possible day for a fiscal hearing, which happens to be day after tomorrow, as in Friday. So maybe we should meet back here next week and do this again. Typically when bills are held in suspense, they can die without a hearing. So it's not always clear what kind of opposition there was to the bill or what some of the issues were around it. It's very opaque. The caucus and the members of the appropriations committee, have their discussions and decisions that are made, and we just get the memo on the last day. So we'll get that on Friday. However, suspense file isn't necessarily a lost cause. So don't despair. It's just a little bit harder to move things at this point in the process when they're on that file. So I will be spending the rest of the day today and all day tomorrow and Friday morning in Sacramento talking to folks about some of the bills that are on that list in yellow. Okay, next slide. Leadership. There don't seem to be any big leadership fights brewing like in previous years. Speaker Rivas, his position is pretty secure. Although I did hear a rumor that he may have his eye on one of the new congressional seats that would come about from the redistricting that's going on the ballot in November. So stay tuned. But for now, the assembly leadership feels pretty stable. The Senate side, we're looking at a transition in 2026 as the current Senate President Pro Tem Mike McGuire is terming out at the end of 2026. And the Senate has already designated Senator Monique Limon as the next President Pro Tem. However, and again, Assemblymember Ahrens kind of teased this bit too in his remarks. In spite of the kumbaya on the leadership side, there are some interesting tensions, and I'm going to pull out one of Senator Wiener's bills that's an SB at Home priority bill, SB 79, as illustrative of that tension.
I sent you a message and said I told you after the. Okay, so take a shower. This will be over at 1 and then I'll make.
If I could ask everybody to please mute your mic and we'll get back to Leslie's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Okay, so SB 79, which would create the path to upzoning near transit stops. Please don't at me. I know it's a lot more complicated than that, but for the purposes of this discussion, it would allow for upzoning near transit stops. Currently, it's sitting on the suspense file, waiting for that hearing on Friday. But in another galaxy, it never would have made it out of committee. This Scott Wiener bill had to get through Senate Housing, which is chaired by Senator Wahab, and local government, which is chaired by Senator Durazo. And in both committees, the bill got out over the objections of their respective chairs. So what? Why is that a big deal? Typically, or usually when chairs get overruled or rolled this way, it can signal that there's some ambivalence or even a split in the caucus over a particular issue. And the perspective on housing appears to be one of those issues. The assembly doesn't appear to be as bedeviled by this rift as the Senate. Assemblymember Wicks, Carrillo, Haney, Speaker Rivas, they all lean towards making it easier, cheaper, faster to build housing. Senator Wiener, author of SB 79, is on the wing of that plane too. Senators Wahab and Duraso, in contrast, while 100% recognizing the crisis wrought by severe housing shortages in California, are more skeptical about giving away the keys to the regulatory store, if you will. They tend towards being more protective of tenants, and seek to use levers such as ministerial approval and CEQA exemptions to require more and deeper affordability and labor protections. And that tends to be the more traditional Democratic position. Pro Tem designee Monique Limon seems to be more aligned with that traditional labor environmental justice wing, but we will be looking to see if there's any changes to the local or government, to the housing committee and the local government committees, which are the ones that, those are the two committees that housing bills tend to go through. So any changes to that, those committees and that leadership after designee Limon takes the gavel in January. So that's what we'll be watching for on the leadership side. Okay, and to take it home, just looking at next year, what to prepare for in 2026. I would say anything Governor Newsom does in the next year should be seen through the national lens. And housing and homelessness is going to be a big part of that. He'll want to neutralize any ability of President Trump to paint California as a failed state. So watch for bold moves on housing and homelessness. Another thing that we could be looking at in 2026, you may recall, and you may have seen that Assemblymember Buffy Wicks and Senator Christopher Cabaldon introduced identical bills to place a $10 billion housing bond on the ballot next year. Both bills are currently languishing in the Senate Rules Committee, but with a recent poll that showed that over 2/3 of Californians identify housing and homelessness as a priority issue, and that a majority of Californians would approve of a state bond for housing, that has reinvigorated a conversation around moving this bond and putting it on the ballot. So we may see that, we may see some activity around that in the next couple of days. With permit streamlining, lot splits, density incentives, clearing the way for faster and cheaper production, you know, a lot of the legislation that came through in the last few years, the main stumbling block to getting housing built is cash. Last year at this time, we were anticipating the regional measure in the Bay Area. We were anticipating the regional measure from BAFA. That was thwarted by anti-tax and NIMBY activists, so it didn't get on the ballot. And since then, the existing NOFAs, the existing funding availability from the state from previous bonds, were spent down or are in their last rounds. So there's just not a lot of options for funding for housing. We still have tax credits available. The PERM source, the permanent local housing allocation, that's still available. Affordable housing, sustainable cities funding available. So like these buckets, they're not that little, but you know, buckets of funding that are available, but not in the amounts that we need. Sources say we would need to triple existing funding to meet the need. So there have been efforts to secure ongoing allocation for the tax credits, so we don't have to fight for it every year. but that hasn't made it past the governor's pen. But we may see that again next year. What we're seeing is that a lot of housing is getting permitted, especially affordable housing, because developers are able to use a lot of the legislative levers that have been approved in previous years, but projects simply are not penciling, and so they're not getting built. Costs of housing were impacted by supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. Those costs haven't gone down. And then it's anticipated that tariffs are going to impact that even more. So, that's the big bugaboo, is that it just costs a lot of money to build the amount of housing that we have need of. One last thing before I wrap up here and open for questions. And this is an issue that's big in Sacramento, tangentially related to housing. And that's artificial intelligence. And I think about this in a couple of different ways. One is the impact that the data centers that are necessary to run these large language models, and we want them in California because we want California to lead on AI, but the amount of energy that it takes to run these data centers is significant, and that can have an impact on grid access for new housing. So that's something that I think we need to be cognizant of. And then even more tangentially, I was thinking about this earlier. I don't know if any of you caught the Daily on Monday, the podcast from the New York Times, but they were talking about the AI arms race for talent. And they told an anecdote about, these young research analysts that are getting poached from company to company and being offered upwards of $250 million pay packages to go from one company to another. And all I could think about is what that's going to do to, what those kind of salary packages do to the average median income in places like Santa Clara County or San Mateo County, and the impact that has on housing and the economy in general. So I'm gonna, with that thought, which is more of an observation, I'm gonna leave it there and hopefully be able to answer some questions.
Thank you, Leslie. That was great. We do have a couple questions from the chat, and also I have a couple of questions. So can you just maybe tell us a little bit more about the California Housing and Homelessness Agency, this new agency, and the restructuring, and more about what that bureaucratic change might mean for housing in Silicon Valley and the state?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, I actually meant to mention that. So as of the decision was made during the session to split up the Business Consumer Affairs Housing Agency into two separate agencies. So consumer and business on one side, and then housing, and then the homelessness services will be included in there as well. And that will be a cabinet level agency. So the head of that agency will be part of the governor's cabinet. That new agency will be effective July 1st of 2026, and it'll include HCD, the Department of Housing Community Development, the Interagency Council on Homelessness, and then California Housing Finance Agency, and the Civil Rights Department, and then a newly created coordinating body, the Housing Development and Finance Committee. it makes sense to have all of these pieces working together. But one of the really important pieces, I think, is that it'll be helpful in cutting costs. Just off the top, Little Hoover Commission estimated that about $50,000 a door will be saved just by closer coordination of these within this agency. What's still left out there that, you know, we'll take another crack at that because people are still talking about it. Most of the tax credit funding and those programs are in the state treasurer's office, not in the governor's office. And so that's still, you know, kind of a kludgy way that, you know, these organizations aren't quite as consolidated and coordinated as they could be. So that's still out there, but this is 100% a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Here's a question from the chat. And please, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will hopefully get to a couple more. So the question was, how do we get more money from the state and the governor to be used for rental assistance, affordable housing, interim housing, outreach, etc.?
Oh man, another good question.
Oh, it's such an easy one, right?
Yeah, it's so easy. Yeah, and you know, and I'll be really candid, kind of over my skis on this one. I spend a lot of time in you know, in the production space, not as much time in the prevention space, but one of the, you know, one of the most meaningful ways of keeping people out of homelessness is keeping them in their homes, and not getting evicted or losing their housing because of costs. One of the things that I work on, and this is definitely more long term, but one of the things that I work on is community land trusts. And that is a local, community-based, very community-run and directed, innovative tool to hold housing outside of the speculative market, where there isn't the financial incentive, you know, to the profit-making incentive around housing, and there's a million different ways to do it. It could be where the land is owned by the nonprofit, by the community land trust, and then the buildings on top of the land can be owned and build equity from the families who live there, or in some cases they're available for rent. And so the families that live there are able to, you know, stay within a band where they're only paying 30% of their income, pardon me, for rent. And, you know, currently, if you start making less money than 30% of what it would cost to stay in that rental unit, in a traditional affordable housing location, you could be asked to leave. And if you make more money than what's permitted, you know, from statute for that affordable housing unit, you may have to leave. So I think community land trusts create a very great tool for that kind of stability, and for tenants and for homeowners. Other than that, I think it's a local play, and where people within the community know who is in need and how to get those resources to the families that need them. But great question. Thank you.
And another question I had is, can you talk more about cap and trade or cap and invest and affordable housing and sustainable communities? Is this, you know, we know that this program is so important for affordable housing production. Is this really at risk? And what can you tell us about how that conversation is going? I've been hearing rumors that it's a big deal.
Yes, it is. It's a really big deal. And I think in terms of, funding availability on an ongoing basis for housing, that's one of the best sources. It's not necessarily at risk. There seems to be a lot of a lot of energy behind the reauthorization of Cap and Invest. And I was just on a call yesterday where we were talking about it. It's estimated over the next 20 years that it could be up to $260 billion in funding. Now 20% of that, so right now 20% of that is set aside for housing. So it's not all for housing, it's for other stuff too. But but I think of this pot of money, the old cartoons where you've got like the guy on the deserted island and he's starving and he looks at his companion and all he sees is like a giant turkey leg. That's kind of how everybody is looking at this money. So for example, in the governor is looking at it and would like to take off the top funding for CAL FIRE. Super important, makes sense. And then and another piece is potentially for high-speed rail, again off the top. And so then whatever's left would be 20% for housing. I think it's especially the high-speed rail piece. You can kind of see some echoes of the abundance of that book Abundance. The discourse around the book has created a permission structure, I think, for having conversations around politically difficult things. And so that's been inserted. But maybe that gives us the permission structure to take a look at other ways of raising funds and looking at other third rail political issues that politicians have traditionally been afraid to take a crack at. So we'll see. But we'll circle back on Cap and Invest, but for now it still looks pretty solid. But any advocacy around preserving funding for housing out of that and not having it picked away too much would be fantastic.
And like so many of these issues and so much of the discussion around housing, it really comes down to, do we have enough money to go around? The answer is not really, but we're going to do the best with what we have,
Right.
and try to increase sources in the future, hopefully. We are pretty short on time, so I don't think we're going to be able to get to the last couple of questions. I did see some just popping in, but thank you for that. One question that somebody asked was how they can get in touch with you. Is it okay if we drop the link to your page on CalStrat's website?
Yeah. And then my email was on the slide deck. lrodriguez@calstrat.com. And yeah, keep in touch. I love talking about this stuff. And I'll talk about the spicier opinions later.
Well, actually, I'm going to drop your email address then in the chat, if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and we're going to move on to a couple of wrap-up slides. So if we can move on to the next one. So we have a call to action. This is our policy in action, our monthly event, and we of course do have an action. So here is our request for everybody who's on the call. This is something we're going to ask you to do today, tomorrow at the latest. But if you can do it, please do it today. Please make 2 phone calls, one to your assembly member, the other to your state senator. There's a link there. You can go to findyourrep.legislature.ca.gov, and I think Manny's going to drop that in the chat as well. If you're not sure who your current assembly member or your current senator are, and on their websites you can find the phone numbers for their district offices. Call their district offices, talk to a staffer, or leave a voicemail and tell them, please tell them that you support SB 79 for more homes near transit. And then also tell them that you are a big supporter of the statewide housing bond. Now that's going to be AB 736 and SB 417. So basically, tell your senator and your assembly member that you support SB 79, AB 736, and SB 417. If you have your phone out and you're on your computer, take a picture of the what's on the screen right now. And if you're zooming in from your phone, take a screenshot so you can remember this later. Again, that's SB 79, AB 736, and SB 417. If you can tell your senator and your assembly member today or tomorrow in the next 24 hours, that'll be great. And remember, when you call their office and you talk to a staffer, I've been a legislative staffer, please be nice to them. They're very busy and they're working hard to make sure that your message can get to your representatives. But don't ever be afraid to call your local rep, your representatives' district offices. They are there to hear from you. Okay, and we'll move on to the next slide if we could. So we want to make sure that you know about our next event in our Policy in Action series, our next monthly event. If you can join us, you can use that QR code to RSVP for our next PIA. That is going to be on September 26th from 12 to 1 p.m., where we will be discussing the housing and school enrollment crisis, because we know that as housing gets more affordable, it's harder for young families to start and stay in this area. So please RSVP for that. And if we could move on to our very last slide before everyone heads out at the end of this lunch hour event, please do stay connected with us. So you can find us on social media. Please follow us on all the socials. And also you can use that QR code to sign up for our newsletter. We put a lot of stuff in our newsletter. It's a big priority method for us to get information out to our members and anyone who wants to sign up. And Manny just dropped the link for that in the chat as well. Sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch with us, please. And again, follow us on socials. Just want to take a minute to say thank you again to Assemblymember Ahrens for joining us, and also to Leslie Rodriguez for your excellent presentation and joining us for this conversation. And thank you to everybody for joining us for your lunch hour today. We hope this has been really educational and helpful. And again, please stay in touch with us. Reach out to Leslie. We can keep this conversation going and keep trying to make some progress beyond the steps that we've already seen so far in Sacramento this year.